Hi, welcome to another episode of Startups Rights. Today, my guest is Maraleis Sinton. She's a founder's associate at Glyphic. Welcome, Maraleis.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here. It's been kind of a long time in the coming,
Yeah,
so excited to kind of walk through my career and
yeah,
any question that you might have for me.
yeah. We caught up a bit earlier. We had a conversation around this, and you were right. We were meant to make this happen a bit earlier, but I'm glad it's finally happening. And there's quite a few questions around career stuff and just startup stuff. So I don't want to waste too much time. I guess I'm gonna just jump right into it. Um, I guess one of the initial questions to you, which I guess will set the stage for the rest of the question, would be, how do you think about building career capital? You know, and and I guess tied to that question would be, what makes it good, a, a job, a good one for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's I can only really speak from my own experience, and I think career is something that's deeply personal. But what I've done for myself was I've always had the belief that no matter what I did, I would end up okay. Right. And so I think some people end up saying, okay, I want to do consulting. I'm going to do everything in my power to do consulting. And that's like the one thing I'm going to do. And I think for me, I always wanted to kind of figure out what I want to do and what I found interesting. And it led me to kind of bounce around in a lot of different industries, have many different mini careers. But I didn't want to just kind of commit to one career because it's like what you have no idea what you're going to learn. And there's the diehard kind of finance bros or whichever industry you talk about, and they're like, I'm gonna just do every single spring week in the world to get into Goldman Sachs or BCG or whatever it might be. And you actually, I think, end up cornering yourself and like you don't even give yourself the opportunity to think about, okay, what else is out there. And I was definitely guilty of that. But I guess to kind of summarize, I think about looking at every opportunity that's in front of you, especially when you're in uni, in your early kind of 20s and figure out what you want to do. Figure out what you like and use that as a barometer of like, okay, I like to do more sales and more analytical stuff. And okay, let's keep doing more of that. Um, but also not restrict yourself from, what kind of jobs you can do because there's so many out there.
True. If you don't know what you like, then how do you approach it?
Yeah, I mean, so I guess for context, I came into university as a politics student. I did not graduate with politics. I graduated with economics, and I went through, I think, over those 4 years of really figuring out what do I actually want to do. And um, I knew that I found decision making and businesses and marketplaces really interesting. But I think even though my 19-year-old self would say like I knew exactly what I wanted to do, I don't think in hindsight I had any clue. And I kind of touched upon this earlier, which was constantly check in with yourself of like, I like this, I don't like this. I like working in a really collaborative team. I like more individual work. I'm a night owl. I'm a morning person. I think that was some of the best career advice I actually received when I was interning at BlackRock was how do you work yourself? Like if you're a morning person, doing investment banking is probably not the career for you or some a career that like you have to stay up really late. Maybe you're a doctor and you're on your night shift or something like that. But if you're a morning person may be doing something like, whether it's fitness related or more market facing, and then kind of like figure out kind of what is your natural settings and working with that. But I think going even a level deeper, is what energizes you. What do you naturally find yourself asking questions about? I think I see a lot of people, um, go into finance. I think I speak a lot about this because that's what my background's in. And they're like, "This is the holy grail of jobs. I'm gonna do it because everyone else is doing it." And I remember having so many career conversations with people who were a few years younger than me, asking them point blank of, "Oh, so you're prepared to work 80, 100-hour weeks?" And they were like, "Oh, I had no idea this is what it entailed." Um, and are you willing to grind that out? It's this constant like question and answer, reflection. What are you learning? What are you not learning? Um, and what is this job actually going to give to you in your life later? Right? Are you willing to kind of forego some of your youth to have this career, or you want a career that actually allows you to live the life and travel and do all these things? It's like, I think establishing what your value system is really important.
One thing I want to follow up on about what you mentioned. Uh, you said no matter what I did, I knew I would end up okay. It's a very
Mm.
healthy mindset. And uh, I don't think, I don't like, you need probably like 10 years of therapy to get to that point, but it seems like you figured it out. Uh,
Believe me,
where
I've
does
done the
it,
therapy.
where do you get that? Like, where did that mindset come from?
Gosh, I can give you like the therapist eyes answer of like I've done all this reflection, but
Yeah.
I think it's just a drive that I've had for as long as I can remember of um I had belief in myself and I backed myself so much, or I still do, that like no matter what career I'll do, I'm gonna figure it out. And I think it's more of a mindset of Um, well, I think during my uni days, it was more the mindset of there's no option to fail, which is maybe a less healthy version of that. But I think as I've kind of m- grown a little bit over the years, it's more like I know I'm going to be fine. I'll figure out a way. And so I think that takes the pressure off of, okay, I have to be X, right? I think a lot of young people, like myself included, have so much of their identity tied up in I'm going to be an investment banker. I'm going to be a venture capitalist or a startup founder, and it's more of this like emotional ideal of who they want to be, which is amazing, and you should totally like chase after that. But there can be that disconnect of like, do you actually want this?
It's a very interesting point. And I think that kind of ties into the next question I had in my head, which was how do you balance, sometimes when we choose a path, we want it to work out like we choose it, it's a natural inclination, human tendency to be like, I want it to work out. But sometimes it's
Mm.
not the right path for us, but it's very hard to kind of, you know, get away from that path because maybe it's like if you feel like a sunk cost, or maybe it's just like, oh, like I cannot believe I'm not doing well, like I'm not succeeding. How do you balance that with, okay, not, I will figure it out versus maybe this is not the right path for me. Let me figure something else out, like, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, definitely. I think the line is like, are there enough negative externalities of that path you've chosen? Right? Because I think if I look at some of the internships and jobs I've done, I definitely have felt like I can't give this up now. I've worked too hard for this. And I forget the fact that I can always abandon ship and I'm going to be fine. Right. And I think it's when so much like emotional cost has gone into like everyone that's chasing after the big internships, right? Like you are hustling for the first 3 months of every term. Like your second year, your third year, if you're a master's student, like all you're doing is internship applications. Like I would be sitting with my flatmates, they're watching a movie and I'm just typing away on the keyboard with like cover letters, and like you pour so much of yourself into it. And so when you finally get it, you're like, I won't, this is who I am. Like I've worked so hard, and you don't even think about what else is out there. And I was definitely guilty of that. But the line is crossed when you kind of think about, okay, what is this actually providing for my everyday life? I'm like, it's either going to be, I get a lot of fulfillment from my job and I enjoy the people that I work with and I feel like I'm having some sort of impact, or it's allowing me to have a life outside of my work, right? Like those are kind of the two main buckets I see. And if you're not getting either of them, which is very often the case, I think when people realize they need to abandon ship, that's the time to get off the bus.
I feel like I diverged I asked so many side questions. Um, but they're valid and fair points. I guess, looking at your background, you're right. Like you could have gone into really all those things we just discussed, like consulting, finance, which are the typical kind of main choices for a lot of university students. It's kind of like a starting point. What made you feel like startup was the right choice?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think a lot of everything that I said, I actually learned in the last couple of years because I was married to the grind and I was very committed to finance. And anyone who knew me was, that was what I lived and breathed and did. And I think, I got to the point where the externalities were too high. And um, where I kind of grew up in California, like, startups was around me all the time, like, it was something so natural, and I think when I came to London, I was kind of missing this type of energy that was so unique to where I grew up, and I actually worked part-time in VC doing my master's at Creative Fund, shout out to them, and I just loved that being in that environment again. It was, incredibly bright people who were also very open and trying to push the edge of innovation and being founding their own companies or investing in companies that were doing these and that um, I don't think I realized I missed. And so I then went in my time at an investment bank doing sell side research. And I think having that contrast made me realize actually, I don't know if this is for me. And I definitely grappled with that over the year that I spent there of like, constantly evaluating and asking myself, is this, you know, either giving me the life that I want to live or making me feel really fulfilled in some kind of way? Because ideally you want both, but you need at least one of them. Otherwise you can kind of get a recipe for burnout. And I felt like um, I wasn't fulfilling those two buckets. And so when I was thinking, okay, for my next pivot, um, what kind of environment, what kind of life, what is my values, was I looking for? And I wanted something that had really high ownership and agency. And I think when you're at kind of big corporates, you very much are like a very small cog in a very big machine. And so I knew I wanted to go to a small firm. And I felt like maybe startups was the place for me because of my experience in VC, but um I think this brings me to the second point, which is I wanted a role where I had high impact. Like I always felt like my work was important, that it was actually driving something. And I think that's what really led me to startups was you get the high agency, you get the impact, and you can often be in a team which really aligns with your values. And I think that Glyphic, I definitely found that with this company, but that was kind of the process I went through of how I ended up here. And then I ended up in the finance associate role because I think a lot of generalists like myself who come from consulting or banking, we're not necessarily technical. Most of us are not. Like I cannot really code Python to build anything functional. And being a technical person was not really for me. And so yeah, I think being founder associate, being an operator where you're figuring out how to scale a business and wear many different hats was kind of the perfect segue for me.
And I am going to ask you questions about your role, and I'm also going to ask
Yeah, yeah,
about
yeah.
Glyphic because Glyphic it's very interesting. Looks like a very interesting company. Um, and you're right, like impact and kind of agency is one of the most common themes and kind of notions when people answer why startups, right? And especially the earlier you go, the more impact you have. Which brings me
Mm.
to my question about there's so many startups out there, like there's so many domains and stages. How one should think about which startup to join when joining a startup, right? Like what factors do really matter?
Yeah, so I think the first one is what stage you want to join at. And you kind of have to really evaluate your skill set and what you actually want to do. Um, so Glyphic is an early stage company. And when I joined, we were only about 13 people. So we'd only raised one round of institutional investing. And that is a slightly different skill set from than being like the part of the founding team versus being a Series A and Series B. And I think a lot of it has to do around how comfortable you are with ambiguity and scrappiness. I think to come into an early stage company that maybe they've already raised, you know, it's and I would even say this to Series A as well. It's like there's no system. There are no best practices. There are no um, sales playbooks or product playbooks. Like you are building it from day one. And that requires a lot of grit and a lot of self-belief that like you have a strong intuition for maybe product or commercial. And then I think also this fighter mentality of like you're not going to give up when you have a bad day, especially like on a sales side, like that, if you're building a product, you like don't even know if you can sell the product into the market. You have no leads, no one knows who you are. And so you really have to grit your teeth and knuckle down. And then I think being in a later stage company, not that I've necessarily worked at it, but, what I've kind of observed with friends of mine or people I know in my network who are at scale ups, it's still very much a scrappy environment, but I think the scrappiness becomes less important and the driving, let's go, let's keep pushing, becomes even more apparent. Just from my observations, I'm sure that people can kind of debate that, but um, that's how I kind of evaluate it. And then after that, it's about industry. What kind of industry you want to go into, what you find interesting. And for me, I felt like if I was going to take this huge career pivot slash risk, I want to do it in an industry that had the most growth potential. And we're in the middle of the AI age. And so it's perfect for me to come into Glyphic. And there's a lot of other kind of factors that go into it about, the team. Do you believe in the founders? Have they raised from good funds? Do they have a good network? Do you believe in the product? And so for those other things, I kind of put on my investor hat and evaluate, okay, would I actually invest money into this company? And fortunately, I worked at Creator Fund who actually invested in Glyphic in their first round as a follow-on. And so I believed in the fund's investment thesis, and it gave me a lot more confidence kind of going to a company like this.
So that's so interesting. That's so cool. And you're right. There's a lot of, even in scale ups, yeah, like there's quite a bit of scrappiness happening. Um, one thing very quickly though, in terms of like team choice,
Mm.
like what are the good measures or I guess the ways to gauge or sense, is this the right team? Is it the right chemistry? Like what factors do you look at when thinking of the team?
I think it's really specific to the individual of like, do you share a similar value set to the team? Like fundamentally, right? Do you work with people that you can respect and get along with? You work very long hours. You need to be able to kind of have uh, passionate conversations and not feel either afraid to say something or that that you're not going to be valued for what you're saying, right? Um, but I think more specifically, I think that's probably what you're asking more is what kind of characteristic makes a strong founder or a founding team. And I think it really goes around first, like Glyphic, our co-founders are highly technical. Do I think these founders are the 1% of their field? Do I think that they have kind of um, a, a natural moat around what they're building? That's kind of the first question, especially when in deep tech. The second is, do they have a bias for action? Right? I think when you come into a startup or any business environment, I think more crucially in a startup, because you have so many unknowns that are unknown, you have to be able to make very decisive decisions very quickly, but also very thoughtfully, right? Like you can spend ages trying to figure out what, certain components of the product is, but ultimately you need to make a decision and be able to iterate on that decision very quickly. And so that's why bias for action is really important, but I think also the low ego component, right? Like, okay, you get it wrong. How quickly can we turn around the ship? And so if you're, egotistical, that process is going to have more friction. So those are kind of the main ones. And then um after that is their intuition to hire the right people, I think is hugely crucial because they have to recognize, the founders or the founding team have to recognize what is my natural skill set? What am I actually good at? And what am I weaker at? And how can I find people who can plug the gaps in my skill set so become more well-rounded. So it's really a kind of analysis of like, the self-reflection, um, and being able to kind of have an intuition for interviewing people, right? Like, being able to assess them and having the people skills. And if, maybe if they are weaker in that field or that area, then finding someone who can do that for
Okay,
them.
yeah. You're right. Very, very, very cool insight, and I agree with pretty much a lot of the things you were saying. Um, and I guess your role itself is founder associate role, which I find a very cool role. Right? Um, and I might be wrong, but I feel like it's very recent, kind of. I mean, at least it caught like kind of traction very recent. Founder associate role, um, and part of it, of what makes it so interesting and cool to me, is it's a typically very generalist role, and you're exposed to many different facets of the business, from sales to marketing to the ops. Can you walk us through what founders associate role entails?
I will do my best. I say that because it can look very different based on the organization. I think, generally speaking, a founder associate role is a nice stepping stone to becoming a chief of staff. And I believe it's actually Jumpstart that kind of coined the term founders associate, where you've got a lot of very talented individuals that have flooded into the city, realized 2 years in that it's not for me, and then it's like, okay, what do I actually do with the skill set that I have? Um, and so based on that, a founder associate role can take many forms. Um, I'm sure that, like, some of the places I applied to for a similar role, I could be doing something completely different. So it's partly a function of, okay, the founders are drowning in work. Who can they offload the work to? But then also the the skill gap that the company has, which needs to be filled. Um, so for my role in particular, I initially was brought in to manage all the operational sides of things, of the perhaps the less sexy, the invoicing, the finance stuff, and everything in between. And very quickly, my role has expanded into a lot of different areas. So I've been helping on the growth GTM side, in the marketing, in the hiring of the SDRs and the sales team, um, building the RevOps system. And I think that's what makes the founders associate role so amazing for people, especially if you're not quite sure what you want to do, is because you can grow with the company. And so when I was interviewing and people were asking, like, why do you want to come here? I really wanted to kind of go on this journey for myself of, how am I going to evolve? What skills am I going to pick up along the way as this company goes through future phases and growth, funding, hitting, revenue milestones. I thought it would be such a cool experience to push myself and to see where I can go, because I felt like my skill set in banking was quite niche, and I felt like I didn't actually know. I could analyze what makes, a good company, but I didn't actually have practice in it, and that's what I really wanted. So hopefully that gives a bit of color on what I do as a founders associate. I think most of them, like I said, turn into chief of staff, building systems, helping manage people, and making sure that everyone's on track.
Whereas very quickly, I see the chief of staff role quite a bit, and I do have a vague understanding of it. But how is it like a more kind of like a maybe more like is it like a similar to founders associate role, but on a different level, or is it because you end up
What's
doing all the things as a chief of staff, right?
Yes, yeah. So is the question is, what's the difference?
Yeah, kind of. I know. I guess what makes it different, because I see that quite a bit too, and a lot of people kind of transition to becoming chief of staffs. So I'm curious if you have a bit of a description of that role too.
Yeah, I mean, chief of staff is also a very broad term. Like, you can find a chief of staff in like Fortune 500 companies, and you typically get a chief of staff for a specific area. So you might have either regionally or team. So I actually have an old classmate of mine who's chief of staff at Palantir Healthcare, and that's very specific. Or then I also have other people in my network that I know who are chief of staff for startups and or scale ups, and they cover a region perhaps. Um, so yeah, I think similar to the founder associate, it's a bit different. I think chief of staff is more sophisticated in that you have more guardrails on what you end up doing. I think most chief of staffs are focused on operational efficiency of like you kind of come into a team. Maybe in like an early stage company, it might be like, I need to build out a whole IT system, or I need to build out a whole RevOps system. Um, versus a founder's associate, I think your projects tend to be very sprawling. And so you end up doing a lot of ad hoc tasks that slowly transition into longer projects. So some founders associates, I think, never become chief of staffs because they end up finding, okay, I really actually like being on the product side, or oh, I actually find revenue operations really interesting, and I want to figure out how to enable teams. But chief of staff tends to stay more high level of how do I enable the team at scale.
I'm assuming it's more unique to later stages of the startup's life, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I guess on a higher level, do you think it's better to be a generalist these days or a specialist? Because I feel like AI has changed the dynamic quite a bit, and I've
Mm.
seen arguments in, I guess, both directions. To develop like an expertise in a certain specific field, or just be a journalist and just adapt and learn quickly. I'm curious about your perspective on
I'm gonna say something incredibly LinkedIn
that.
post clickbait. Um, I actually think there's a lot of value in being a very deep generalist. Because what I mean by that is for you to understand the larger picture, you need to understand the whole system. Right? You can't have a surface level understanding of how teams function, because if some people get stuck in the weeds and they never come out, and then they kind of lose track of the higher level strategy of where are we going as a North Star as a company. And then some people are so high level that they don't understand how the teams communicate. So an example of this is, this is I'm in the office, this side is our GTM, our sales team, and that side is the engineering. And I think if you didn't have the detail, you would never notice, how much sales interacts with product. Like, hey, I just got off a demo. They gave me this feedback. We've heard this feedback 10 times. Can we build this feature in our products? Versus, another engineer who isn't necessarily customer facing, just has to walk 10 feet and say, how do you think about this? I'm building this product. I want to be understanding how the customer thinks. And as a chief of staff or a founder associate, like that understanding is so important because you understand the broader system of what it actually takes to get this engine up and running and how to maintain it and make sure that you have enough WD-40 for it, right? And that's why I say you need to be a deep generalist.
So if I can recap what you said, kind of for my own understanding clarity, you're saying like having broad exposure to different aspects of the business, from product to engineering to, but not a superficial level, but more on a deeper level, right? So
Mm.
you don't focus on one thing too much, but also you don't just like learn a bit and kind of like jump from one thing to another, right?
Exactly. So I think, if you were going to externally hire a chief of staff, I think typically what they would do is they'd spend time in each major team, understand how it works, do some sales calls, understand the workflow of an SDR, of an AE, maybe come over into kind of the product, the customer success, the life cycle of the customer, understand end to end what the customer experience is. And then you might spend some time in product and understanding, how you think about everything. And there's a lot of other teams as a company grows, but those are, at least from our company, the main ones. And by doing so, you're not only kind of building those relationships, but you're piecing together how everything flows.
How do you maintain a balance, Maraleis?
Um, a balance between what generalists and being more high level and then getting into the weeds, or
You mentioned, which is a very interesting point. Actually, I'm going to think about it a bit more after the call. But being a deep generalist, which is a very interesting
Mm.
term. But I'm assuming there certainly needs to be balance between like you don't get lost in the details, but also you don't just take it too many steps back. How do you approach that balance?
Again, I think it really depends on the individual. Like, what are your natural skill sets, right? Because I mean, there's going to be commonalities for all founders, associates, and chief of staffs. You're fundamentally an operator. You like building systems. You're simultaneously people oriented, but you're very commercial, and you understand products and you understand like the sales cycle. And so, I think when I look at my own career trajectory, I'm constantly trying to fill gaps in my skill set. An example of this is like been working a lot with marketing. I have absolutely no background in marketing. I think before I started, I thought that it was mostly just like adverts and branding. I didn't actually realize. I laugh at myself for saying this out loud, but I didn't really realize all the other stuff that goes into it. And so that's an example of you know upskilling and kind of finding that balance again, because I think before I think, oh, marketing high level, oh, actually let me dive in, because it's actually super fundamental to a business. And for me to kind of drive higher level strategy with the founders, I need to understand this very crucial business function. So at the moment, for me it's more reactive. I think in if I look back at kind of my last 6-7 months here at Glyphic, it's very much what I've been thinking about it more from like, yeah, the skills gap. But then anytime there's a bottleneck in the team, I think that's a time for me to actually either go up in kind of, okay, where are we going? What are we driving? Or go back down depending on what the issue is. And so I think you can take signals within the business of when to delve in deeper, or when to kind of bring it back up of like, right, guys, getting lost in all these side projects when we really need to be focusing on something else.
Yeah, so being reactive actually helps kind of, and another, I guess, but the twofold. My balance question was a bit of a twofold question. The second part of it was because you move so fast, you have to execute constantly, but also you have to learn because there's a lot of things we just come in without knowing, right? And finding that balance between, what in terms of spending your time, was it I need to learn or I need to execute? Like, gotta be a hard balance, no?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, again, another LinkedIn saying is your like signal to noise ratio, right? I
Yeah,
see all these
yeah.
posts all the time when it cracks me up. But there's a lot of truth to it as well. Um, and there isn't really a one size fits all. I think how I think about it is, what are the top three most important things for the business at this time, right? I think for most companies, it's going to be revenue and top of funnel. And for any startup, it's going to be product, right? And so in your day, you can figure out very quickly, is this task driving one of these three things? If not, it can wait, right? So when you're especially in very busy periods, that's what you have to go off of. And I think you only build more of an intuition for that the longer you're out of business, and you figure out how they operate.
Do you think this role is a good starting point? I guess I forgot the main term I had in mind for becoming a founder eventually later yourself.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think in every single interview I did, it was one of the first questions of like, do you want to be a founder? And I think it's the perfect training ground for that.
When you think about becoming a founder, and I've heard different stories. Some people are missionary founders. They've
Mm.
been focused on one mission for ages. Some people are mercenary founders. There's a trend, AI trend, climate tech trend, etc. And they jump in on the trend. They can be successful. It doesn't mean anything, but overall, that's a term I learned from a VC investor I had a conversation with. When you think about becoming a founder, and you've been in the space for some time now, what would push you to? I'm sure you're not thinking about it right now actively as you're building Glyphic, but
Mm.
what would push you to become a founder later on, later down the line?
That's a great question. I kind of have, it can go two ways. The first is I have a great idea. I have yet to find that great idea. So if anyone has ideas, please let me know. But that's one of them, right? Like, you know, I work at Glyphic. We get a nice exit. I kind of stumble upon this problem that's really has a very large market that no one's tried to address, or if they have, maybe I can do it better. Like that's the kind of the ideal world, like, right? But I think oftentimes a lot of people, it comes to them, right? They get approached by someone that already has the idea, and it's like, I think that you would be a great co-founder for me because I'm maybe really technical and don't have the commercial acumen. Can you help me with this? And I think that's more often how it goes. But you know, Adam and Devang, when they founded Glyphic, they were both at Google DeepMind. They both really wanted to start a company, and I think they're much more of the first of like, I want to found this company and I want to find this idea. And so I guess I'm getting a bit more into Glyphic's story where they at Google DeepMind were working on LLMs, how they learn, how you train them, and knew that the future of LLMs would be around unstructured data. And so they wanted to go into a market that had a lot of unstructured data. And I think that's really where they came into kind of call recording, technology, CRM, sales teams, because like even like a call on this, there's so much data that you can collect and you can analyze and make very useful decisions on that wouldn't have been collected if you were just typing up your notes on a CRM. And so that's really how kind of Glyphic came to be, which was, hey, we have all this data. It's so useful. Teams can, you know, use this to execute faster. And that's really where Glyphic is sitting, is how do we close this execution gap? How do we be a part of this paradigm where the old way was kind of the automation of the CRM, and kind of data collection, to leveraging that data and making your teams effectively just move faster.
I'm literally just getting to Glyphic, which means you're gonna repeat some of the points you just said again, unfortunately. But before that, I had a very quick question about, because you're in a space, you're exposed to special early stage side of things quite a bit. Do you think like starting a successful startup is becoming more and more difficult? And the reason I'm saying this is because a lot of people are starting startup. There's a lot of kind of, sometimes there's startups that are not really like, sure, there's always going to be some sort of pain point to fix or go after, but there's also quite a few startups that are just kind of creating a problem to solve later, and with AI, things are getting a bit different in terms of making it, in terms of bringing a product to the market. But also a lot of them are dependent on like large language models, like the OpenAIs and Anthropics, and one model update can erase God knows how many startups out of existence, right? Do you think it's getting harder to start a good startup?
No. And the reason I say this is, if you think about the number of startups, okay, I'm sure if you ran an analysis on company house filings over time, you would see a huge acceleration in the last 5 years, for sure. But if you look at the frequency of unicorns, yes, again, it's accelerating because you have the technology. But I don't think, and again, I haven't really looked at the data, but my intuition would be that it's a very, very crowded market. There's a lot of noise, but there's still quality out there. It has to go down to like the non-cognitive traits I think I was talking about before, which is a bias for action and a genuine moat. So Creative Fund was where I worked, where I kind of developed this kind of thesis. And so I really credit them. When you use those two characteristics, a bias for action and a moat, a technical moat, actually a lot of the startups that you see in the market kind of falls away, and you can see what like actually value in a value company or value investing type of thesis. And so the volume of companies that I think are coming to the market is a lot because of these LLMs. It's making it possible. It's great that you're solving all these problems, but the problems to begin with were not necessarily a $1 billion company problem that they could fix, right? It wasn't gonna be a unicorn to begin with. And so when you kind of analyze that component of it, you can see very clearly, okay, actually, there's huge scope still for viable companies or viable founders.
Would you, and you mentioned creator fund a couple of times, what made you not stay in the VC world and move to the operator side? And then would you go back to the VC world?
Yeah, I mean, I was working part-time in the student program. It was designed, not as a full-time role. It was very much helping primarily PhD students who were very technical get VC experience either to become a VC themselves or to found their own company. And so I was fortunate enough to be part of the non-technical group to be a part of that program and, learn an incredible amount from the team there about how to think about investing. Would I, go back? It's definitely something I've thought about. At the moment, it's not a focus for me. Um, I really have been enjoying my role as an operator. I think it actually will make me a better VC if that was something that I chose to do. Because I think VC and founders or operators kind of they move back and forth, right?
Yeah.
You go to a company, you exit, you're like, I have some extra free time on my hands.
Extra
Maybe I'll do
money.
like extra money. Maybe I'll go out and be an investor for a bit. You've stumbled across a company that you think is amazing. You decide, actually, I want to go back in and be an operator. And so I think it's very fluid.
Yeah. Yeah. You were right. Glyphic, finally, we're sure.
Yes, yes.
What are you guys
Long
building?
awaited.
Long waited. What are you guys building? Why now? Why it's so exciting?
Yes, so I kind of give a brief history on Glyphic. And what we're building is a conversational intelligence tool for GTM teams to help close the execution gap. And what that looks like in practice, as I was saying earlier, which was, okay, sales teams have all this unstructured data on their calls, from understanding and doing discovery call with a potential customer, going through all the sales cycle, understanding that process. And when you have that volume of data, you not only are understanding, okay, what is your sales motion and what your ICP is, but then also understanding the market, right? You're getting constant feedback from how, for us, we sell to CROs, how CROs are thinking, what their issues are, what they're experiencing, and that is a very large feedback loop of informs the product, let's build more, let's improve. Oh, we have this great new feature that can actually continue helping teams progress, so on and so forth.
And just to clarify, the end user would be the sales team or the RevOps team in this case?
Yeah, though I would say our long-term goal is the whole GTM function. So at the moment, we primarily sell to sales teams in the mid-market and moving up that very quickly. But then we also have a lot of customers who bring on their customer success team because they have access to all this data, right? If you're an account manager or a CS person and you're working like with company A and you have access to kind of all the pain points and the AE experience, you know how to manage them better as a customer.
In a way, it's a tool that brings all this information, scattered information from all places into one kind of platform and makes it available for you. So to go there, get it, and then go ahead and execute, right? Is that the right understanding?
Yes, that's exactly right. Of like, I think in the old way, you had very siloed teams that had to kind of rely on CRM notes, which were probably not as good as you would like them to be. And so I don't think it wasn't as easy for teams to connect and understand what is happening across our GTM motion. And so with Glyphic, especially like how we use it internally, you know, marketing has access to how prospective customers are receiving and listening to it, how we are pitching, right? How can we inform marketing better? How can we, tailor the messaging so that we can actually, succeed and continue taking market share? To RevOps of like how like why aren't we closing as many deals as we like? I can go in, I can analyze on the coaching side of things, um, which teams are struggling, why they're struggling against kind of the scorecards that you use. So we do have this huge coaching element. And then down to kind of the individual reps, we have the coaching simulator where you might have feedback on this from the system saying, oh, the last few months you haven't been as good with next steps. And you can design a coaching platform to kind of help you do that. You can set up a cold call. Maybe you need to freshen those skills that you have, and that's something that you can do all in one platform.
Wow, that's really cool. And it is, looks like, there's a huge market for that, obviously. So the sky's the limit, I guess, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, anything within B2B SaaS, that's kind of our bread and butter, is serviceable for us.
I am, I have a decent amount of understanding of the GTM and, the sales functions. And it is a tough, one of the probably most important, but also the toughest aspects of building and growing a business. Mm. And obviously later down the line, once you become big enough and famous enough, it becomes a bit easier to get in front of the people. But in the early stages, it's a battleground to get the tension, get the pilots running, etc. How do you think of the go-to-market function when it comes to early stage sales?
As in, how do you build it?
I guess, how do you build it? And I guess, what have been your main takeaways so far? What are the hardest parts? What are it really, I feel like it's just fascinating saying to, especially now, because there's like, again, there's so much there, and a lot of people are reserved to just, give it a chance, especially when you go to enterprise clients, right? Like the earlier, maybe it might be a bit different, but enterprise, it becomes even more challenging. Um, what's your kind of takeaway so far in terms of early stage go-to-market function and sales function?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that's something that we're experiencing firsthand right now. Like Glyphic is scaling really fast. We're hiring a lot of people on the GTM side, especially SDRs and account executives. And I think my observations from kind of leading parts of that project is, again, it goes back to the, I think, non-cognitive traits of and having the people skills to evaluate talent. Um, Earlier in the conversation, we talked about kind of having this mentality of no matter what I do, I'm going to be fine. And that was very much the profile I looked for our junior sales reps of, do you have the mentality that you are going to will the universe to make it happen? Right? Like, you're going to be fine regardless, but it's like, I am determined. And I think that was the number one characteristic I want you to see was that grit, the determination, and the kind of scrappiness, the creativeness to keep driving and taking initiative. And when you take that and scale it up and you look at, maybe the next level of account executives, you still need that. Like, yes, they need to have closing experience. They need to know how to work a deal cycle. Hopefully they have experience in the same kind of sale motion as us at Glyphic, which is, B2B SaaS with a certain contract value. Um, but again, it still stands like they need to have that mentality of, I'm just going to go. I'm going to drive. I'm going to take the wheel and keep going. And that's, I think, yeah, the number one trait that I see in terms of kind of the other functions like RevOps and marketing. That kind of skill set's a bit different. It's, say, marketing far more strategic, and you need to have that commercial acumen of not just understanding the product and understanding the sales motion, but how to speak to the market, right? And from the messaging all the way to how do you develop thought leadership, right? Like if you want to be a unicorn, you can't just create this product. You need to have an opinion in the market. You have to say why your company, say Glyphic, is better than Gong, is better than Attention, and keep driving and building layer on layer of that narrative so it becomes very sophisticated. And that is, yeah, that's also a separate skill set. And then you take kind of the operational side of things and being very detail oriented of how do we enable the sales team as best as possible, both from like a tech stack perspective, but then also giving them the best quality leads as possible. And this is kind of getting down more into the weeds of things, but that's how I think about the GTM function, at least from within Glyphic, of each part has their role and you want to find kind of the best for each.
You're right. And building in public has become such an important thing for a lot of founders. And then founders kind of shape narratives, and narratives shape markets, and markets shape successful startups. It's very much like a circular way, a bit. I guess part of that question also was, and I don't want you to disclose anything confidential, obviously, but getting in front of those people, those customers, those potential leads, as an early stage startup, right? When there's no kind of big brand names, there's no big like a customer logo, like what are some techniques or what are some kind of strategies that work overall in early stage kind of go-to-market function?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I think, I mean, at least for Glyphic, like I truly believe our technology is better than our competitors, and I think that the product really sells itself. So I think that has been a huge driving factor for how our sales team does. Um, I think the other is just asking. I don't mean just, asking for time in front of a customer. I mean, like, okay, maybe you have these target accounts that you want to go after. Someone's in your network who's really connected to them. You're like, hey, do you want to be an advisor for us? Right. So I think it's getting very creative around who can you leverage, who can you kind of bring into your company to help drive that. Because you're right, like, small early stage companies don't have the name brand recognition. I think people like Glyphic is getting onto the map and people know who we are, and we do go up against Gong and some of our other competitors a lot in a POC, and so people are familiar. But you're right, we're not we don't have a unicorn status, and a lot of that kind of is coming together as we're growing. That's kind of the goal, right? And then the other is the marketing, right? SEO marketing, being very strategic about anything from ad placements, keyword searches, etc. Like that is, number one thing. I think all the articles I've read about scaling to Series A to Series B is never underestimate the role of SEO marketing, product marketing, growth marketing, as a huge driving factor for that.
We're kind of coming full circle, and we're coming towards the end of our episode. And I can't believe we've been talking for 55 minutes. It's just time flies when you're having fun, right?
Yeah, exactly.
AI starts reshaping work and how we work. What one skill you're saying becomes incredibly important and essential, and I think you kind of touched upon it, is like bias for action and kind of having that hustle in you too. And what's one skill you think, I guess, if you were flip the script, what's one skill you think people are overestimating?
People skills. I think you see all these memes in Silicon Valley where it's like, oh, we have this social issue. Let me build an app for it. Let me build another dating app. Let me build an app to make friends. Like
AI
it's,
dating app where your AI profiles date each other. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that, we're not at the stage where technology is going to dominate and jobs don't exist. Like that's not the future we're at the moment, or sorry, that's not the present we're at. Um, yes, you have a lot of automation happening. A lot of my work is automated. I just kind of review stuff. A lot of engineering work is a lot of just reviewing code, not necessarily coding it. But that ultimately people are going to be running businesses for a very long time, at least from an operational sense, right? Like you still need someone to kind of um tell someone else to, like, we have, say, like 25 people in this business still, and we're an AI company. We're
Yeah,
AI sales teams and we
yeah,
still have salespeople.
yeah.
So um yeah, people skills is I think the number one thing. Like so long as people are in a business, you need to understand, how to create teams and enable teams, and always be reminded, like, people are at the center of it, and that the people that you're, or the customers that you're selling to, there's a person behind that making the decision. And I think in a digital age, we kind of, well, I actually do think we're coming full circle a bit in this. I think we hit a huge peak in terms of, like, let's automate everything, and um now I think people are realizing the large, like, social externalities that come from that. But yeah, in short, the people skills.
If you could go back to your university years, which I mean, it sounds a bit of a weird question because you're still, you're very young and you're at the beginning of your career. But if you could go back and start over again, is there anything you would do different? And the reason I'm asking is there might be quite a few people in a similar position where they're just starting universities, they're just thinking about their career. And as an advice, what would you give to them as well?
Hmm. So I don't think I'd necessarily do anything different. I've kind of, I've always been someone who, I don't want to have regrets. Like, I made the call or the choice or decision I made with the information and tools that I had. I don't think that I could have made a better decision. Right. Um, that being said, if I had to choose something, I think evaluating what I valued in terms of the life I want to live, the career that I want to have. I think I should have done more when I was younger. I think I say that, but there's also, like, when you're 18, how the fuck are you supposed to know what to do with your life, right? Um, but I think I wish I hadn't bought into the CV chasing craze as much as I did. Um, I think I learned an incredible amount. I wouldn't be in the role that I'm in now without some of the amazing opportunities I've gotten. And so I feel very lucky and privileged to be here. But I also know that I probably could still be in a very good position without breaking my back some of the time.
Well, it's been an incredibly interesting and fun episode. And very, very funnily, I just found out that you're Californian. I didn't even learn about that when we first called. But that's
Yeah,
really
yeah.
that's really cool. And I want to say, if you ever think about a different career, you should consider becoming a therapist because you have a very healthy mindset. Um,
Thank you.
but thank you so much for your time and wonderful insights. And I'm looking forward to staying in touch and hearing more good news.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, it's been a real pleasure chatting tonight. I had a lot of fun. And yeah, hopefully it's useful for people. And this is just like my experience here at Glyphic, and still pretty green in terms of being an operator, and so still have a lot to learn. Um, but I think it's one of the most rewarding experiences that someone can have. So I think if you, a young graduate, or maybe someone a few years into your career, or even like very far into your career, and you want to have a change, you know, take the leap, believe in yourself. I said that's so cliche, but, like, realistically, most people are gonna be fine. And I think it's like, if you back yourself and you focus on like the what am I learning? What am I taking away? How is this adding to my life? Then you figure it out.
Like in a day and age when things change so fast, having fresh perspectives is always important and necessary. So thank you, Marlies, and
Yeah,
take care.
thank you. Yeah, you too.